So this whole thing happened when I was maybe 12, and I'm nearly 17 now. Me and my sister, who was 14 or 15 at the time, were staying home while our parents were at my little brother's hockey game. We lived in a fairly safe neighborhood, hardly anything ever happened, and everybody knew everybody, and almost everyone got along and liked each other, so we felt pretty safe as we didn't have a reason not to. Our front door was locked, our back door was locked, but our side door didn't lock as it was broken. But no one ever used it anyways, so my dad hadn't gotten around to fixing it yet. Me and my sister were in the living room watching TV and doing homework when we heard the fence outside of our house making some noise, and it sounded like someone had jumped over the fence. So my sister looked through the blinds, and sure enough, someone had jumped the fence. 2 people actually, and they were dressed in mostly black, with like a hospital mask over their faces. We freaked out and hid in between the couches in the living room when we heard the front doorknob wiggle. Of course, it was locked, so it didn't open, but we knew whoever it was would go to the other side next, and that one would open. And in that moment, I was the most terrified I'd ever been. But once the door handle started jiggling loudly, my dogs woke up. At the time, I had a Tosa and a Rottweiler. Once one started barking, so did the other one, and eventually it just became pure chaos. And that's when we heard them scream, "Yo, they got dogs!" Then we heard the fence make the same noise as if though someone had just jumped over it again. Later that night, a local gas station near my house got robbed by 2 armed men, and the news report showed the same people that we had seen, same outfits and everything, except this time, we got to see their faces. Our dogs truly may have saved our lives that night. And the funny thing is, our dogs are the biggest lovers. They may be loud and bark, but they wouldn't bite or attack anybody. And this is the one time I'm very glad these dog breeds are associated with being quite scary and aggressive, because clearly they scared off whoever wanted to break in that night. This happened around 2018, right after my sister moved out of our apartment. It's been bothering me since I moved out as well. I was home alone on my day off when someone knocked on my door. And no one ever visits, and I have anxiety, so that was already terrifying to my brain. I answered, and it was a woman who lived in one of the basement apartments. She seemed nice at first, asking if I wanted any clothes that she was giving away because they weren't her style, but supposedly matched mine perfectly as a young woman. And that was already a red flag in my mind, because the only time I ever saw her was when I was walking to work, wearing my uniform of a black shirt, black pants, and a black hat. But I let her talk because I'm super awkward and I hate being rude to total strangers. She then started getting pushy and listing off super expensive name brands to try and get me to go to her apartment. It was an old, small building with no cameras, and I lived on the second/top floor, which would be down what I called the creepy stairs and next to the door to the back lot that no one used. Then I realized that she was holding a notebook open with a script of what to say. I continued to reject, but my anxiety wouldn't let me close the door on her face without fear of her lashing out. And she kept insisting until I finally told her my boyfriend was going to be home soon and suggested that she donate the clothes. My boyfriend wasn't going to be home for many hours, but she didn't need to know that, obviously. And she left, and I went back to my room, which has a window facing the back lot and alley. A few moments later, I heard a fight happening in the lot and saw her with the previous, he was already fired at that point, maintenance man. It was a loud screaming fight, and they were standing next to his truck, which had tinted windows and a covered truck bed. My paranoia went a little wild, so I texted my family about it to feel a bit safer. Then, I believe he left. But a little while later, something hit my door hard. I didn't check, I just stared. And then it happened again, and again, all night until my boyfriend came home. And for a few days when I was alone. I found out after looking at the door that they were hitting my deadbolt, and it was off-center. Even after it was replaced, the damage couldn't be fixed. It stopped after a little while, and the woman moved out almost immediately after all of that. Now, I don't want to feed my paranoia, but something obviously wasn't right. I know I should have called the police, but I have horrific phone anxiety, and I was just kind of losing my mind that night, and I even thought that I was overreacting, and the police in my town are relatively useless. And also, that maintenance man was rehired and was the one who replaced my deadbolt, insisting that he kept the extra key despite never needing the old one. Thankfully, my new house is much safer. This incident occurred about a week ago when I had ridden my bike to school with my best friend. Since we planned to work on a project together after school, it seemed like a convenient arrangement. On our way back home from school, we decided not to head straight home and opted for a short bike ride down a path near the park, which would eventually lead us back to my house. While we were unlocking our bikes from the racks, I noticed a red Dodge Dakota parked across from the school. Now, just to give you some context, we live in a fairly small town, so we usually know which cars belong to the students and teachers. However, I didn't recognize this one. It was already about an hour and a half past the usual school dismissal time, but I assumed that it might be a relative picking up someone, so I didn't think too much of it. And we began biking towards our chosen path, and after about 5 minutes, my friend mentioned that the red truck was driving on the road parallel to the sidewalk that we were biking on, a little behind us. I reassured her that it was probably just a coincidence and that the driver likely lived nearby. We continued on our way. However, when he continued to follow us for another 10 minutes, my concern grew. We decided to ride to a nearby gas station where there would be more people around and less chance of something happening. We parked our bikes and went inside, grabbing drinks and a snack to make it less conspicuous. And while we were in there, I called my brother and explained the situation, asking him to come pick us up. He said that he would be right there and advised us to stay inside. We paid for our snacks and informed the cashier about the situation as well, and she allowed us to stay inside until my brother arrived. When my brother pulled into the gas station, we walked out to retrieve our bikes. However, they were nowhere to be found. After looking around, we spotted the red truck parked behind the gas station with our bikes right next to it. The man who had been driving it was staring directly at us. We immediately told my brother, who instructed us to forget about the bikes and just get in the car. So we did, and my brother got out of the car and went into the gas station to get the employee, and while he was doing that, the man sped off out of the back parking lot of the gas station. When my brother came out, he said that the gas station worker was going to check back on the cameras and see if she can get a license plate to give to the police. And then my brother gave her our mom's information for any updates. We both made it home safe, and I'll keep y'all updated when we find out more. I'm just still terrified what we were being set up for. The encounter happened very recently, and I honestly don't know if I'm overthinking things or not, so I'm turning to you guys. So my boyfriend and I went to Dave & Buster's for a date night the other night, and everything was going well until I passed by this woman standing closely next to a couple. At first I thought she was with them because she was following them around. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, and I noticed her staring at me from afar, which was weird, but I shrugged it off since I'm Southeast Asian and hanging out in an area primarily populated by Caucasian and Hispanic individuals. And then, as my boyfriend and I walked past her, I felt her tap my arm. So I did what any normal person would do when someone taps their arm. I looked. When I turned my head to look at her, she didn't say anything and continued to stare with a sort of blank expression in her eyes. I paid no mind to it. I have a heavily tattooed arm, so I thought, maybe she doesn't understand social cues and just wants to touch my tattoo. Yeah, that's it, right? Now, a few minutes later, we were still looking for another arcade game to play, and once again, I saw that same woman, but this time she wasn't with the couple, and she was staring again. My boyfriend and I found a game to play, and as I focused on watching him take his turn, I felt a few quick taps on my arm once again. It was the same lady. This time I decided not to look despite how uneasy I felt, but I did see her pass by. My boyfriend finished his turn on the game and we started looking for another one. As we walked around, I started analyzing the strange woman. She didn't have an arcade card and was walking around pretending to press buttons on machines every so often. She did not arrive there with anyone. The couple she was by earlier was nowhere to be seen at this point, and the look in her eyes kind of reminded me of the people on some type of heavy drug in the downtown part of where I live, and she had a creepy and very stoic look on her face. As we headed to the ticket prize area, I was talking to my boyfriend about something and felt her tapping my arm again. And this time I was fed up. I quietly told my boyfriend, who, mind you, is a pretty big and buff guy with 2 tattooed arm sleeves, and he looks like he's part of the Yakuza. My boyfriend asked me to point her out, so I looked around to find her, and I saw her staring again. I pointed right at her, and my boyfriend was about to walk towards her, but she hid behind the arcade machine. We left after that because I felt pretty uncomfortable, especially since I'm already not okay with strangers touching me without my consent. And now that I've had time to process everything, I realize how creepy and strange that encounter with that woman was. I keep getting reminded of the blank look in her eyes and haven't been able to sleep properly because of it. I posted this before, and this too happened in the early to mid-80s. I lived in Kenner, LA, and a friend and I would ride our bikes everywhere. No parents cared or knew where we went as long as we were home by dark. Anyway, there was a large airport a few miles from my house, and we would ride our bikes along a levee and get really close to the back runway and sit and watch the airplanes land. It was really cool. There were train tracks that ran behind there too that ran off into the swamp that we would play on, put coins on the tracks and let them get smashed, and once or twice we jumped onto and off of a moving train. Anyway, an unsupervised kid's dream. So one day we were back there messing around and this guy shows up. Mid-30s, I would guess, really nice, no bad vibes that we saw anyway, and he befriended us. Would ask when we were coming back and would meet up with us out there. He brought us cigarettes. Yeah, we were smoking at 12, soft drinks and all kinds of stuff. Well, one day he offered us lunch, but we had to go back to his trailer. We were dumb kids, so we agreed and rode our bikes to his house. It was in the woods, no neighbors, and it was 2 of us, so what could happen, right? Anyway, we go in and he gives us a couple of sandwiches and a Coke. I look on the table and there's a Hustler's magazine and a couple of other hardcore magazines and actually some gay magazines too. And he tells us to go ahead. He doesn't mind if we look at them. And we do. Man, we were 12 and just full of hormones. Well, he proceeds to tell us that he's gay. I didn't know what gay was at the time. It wasn't talked about and I wasn't interested if it was. He went on to say that he wouldn't ask us to do anything we didn't want to do, but he would if we wanted to, and just really was acting like a salesman for being gay. I really don't know any other way to explain it, and I'm not trying to be rude. My friend and I both got the same bad vibe and decided that it was time to go. He asked us when we would be back, and we made something up, and he said that he would meet us then. I'm sure he was planning something. I don't know why he let us leave. He never touched us or tried anything, but this was the one and only time we went to his trailer and the last time we went behind the airport. I'm sure if we would have went back that it would have been a different story though. I'm positive that he was setting something up to do to us, and it seems like there were a lot of predators in the 80s. I used to hang out with my cousin a lot. We were both 10-year-old males at the time of this encounter, and I'm now 33 years old, but it stayed with me ever since. We mostly spent our youth roaming the streets, not causing trouble, but kicking footballs around fields, climbing, and hanging out with kids our age, the typical stuff before iPads and Netflix became commonplace. One day we decided to explore a part of town that we'd never visited before. This meant going through alleyways and back streets. The trail would actually end approximately 2 to 3 minutes from my house, which was in a safe part of the neighborhood. It was a sunny day, albeit not too warm, and my cousin and I had been walking for what seemed like miles. The journey that we had planned was supposed to go on for longer, but we got bored and decided to take a detour home. The detour involved cutting through an alleyway that looked a little bit like the Coronation Street Ginnel, if anyone is familiar with the TV show, and to the left of us were terraced houses, and to the right were steel fences with sharp points to deter would-be thieves. We continued up there, and soon enough, one of the kids from our school lived there, and his mom shouted, "What are you boys doing here?" We ran. I don't know why, we just didn't like her son, and her tone was accusatory. And as we ran, we bumped into another kid. "Don't go that way," he said, as his voice trailed off while he ran further and further away from us down the opposite end of the alleyway. We shrugged and continued on. It got darker with the trees and foliage, but we soon emerged from the alley. And that's when we saw the lone boy. A boy aged 10 to 12 stood there, and his eyes were empty, and he had a sort of vacant look on his face, well, the half of his face that we could see well enough. Above his mouth was covered with a veil, somewhat like a Halloween mask of some description, except it was June. Halloween was months away. As we got closer, we noticed the boy had a kitchen knife in his hand, a fully real stainless steel kitchen knife with both hands on the handle. The sunlight made the blade glisten, and we sort of cracked a joke, "Cooking outside?" But he looked at us very blankly, showing no emotion. We were too freaked out to move, and that's when we realized that he hadn't moved either, not a muscle. We saw him blink, but physically, the knife hadn't been raised up or pointed at us, just held closely to his chest, blade pointing upwards. We figured that we should get away because instinct told us that this was weird and a bit freaky, and going back down the alleyway didn't seem like a safe option. Being stuck in an alleyway with a strange kid with a knife didn't seem smart, and in front of us was a road on a steep hill, and that was our best bet. We walked up to the top of the hill, keeping an eye on the kid, and the top of the hill was 2 to 3 minutes from my house in terms of distance, and at last we actually felt safe. As we looked back down the hill, the lone kid had put the knife by his leg, now holding it in one hand, but he remained in the exact same spot and stared right back up at us, very expressionless. We told our parents what had happened, and they called a local community enforcement team to sort of scout the area. And apparently the kid was found with the knife, but we never heard why he was there or what he was doing with it. And 23 years after it happened, it's still always on my mind. I thought I knew what a narcissist was up until 2 days ago. I had studied it and remembered the traits. I thought I knew about 4 of them, including my parents. Trust me, there's a whole other level of it, and it would be scary to witness if you weren't very secure in yourself. Experiencing it firsthand is mind-boggling. If you even think a person could not have narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, then they probably don't. I was able to detect it extremely clearly in someone to a degree of absolute certainty, and I'm glad I had this encounter because what I had previously thought about certain people was, in fact, completely wrong. I was sitting in a coffee shop at 6 a.m. downloading movies on their Wi-Fi. A guy in a truck parked and came up to the car's slightly open window, asking about the prices of local homes. He appeared to be around 35 to 40 years old, well-dressed, charming, and didn't stutter or sound unintelligent. I initially thought this guy was normal, asking a pretty basic question, so I remained passive. However, he didn't seem to want to leave and stood there in awkward silence after I told him the price range was $320,000 to $500,000, and then he asked me, "Who's the best builder?" And I thought to myself, do I look like a realtor? I told him I didn't know, and he then said, "You have a good long weekend, thanks." And that's when things got weird. He went into the coffee shop for 45 minutes, and I started to think that this was somewhat odd. When he came out, he walked back up to my window and gave me an odd look of disappointment, saying, "Okay." You have a nice long weekend. As if we needed to continue our conversation from before his 45-minute absence. He then talked to someone passing by in front of my car, and they seemed to know each other from years ago. The person asked him, "So you're back in town?" I thought, maybe this guy isn't the creepiest person I've ever met. However, the situation quickly turned even stranger. He put on his headphones, walked to the tailgate of his truck, crossed his arms over the back of it, and rested his head in his arms, and stared at me for at least 5 minutes from about 30 feet away, glancing at him every minute to see if he was still staring at me. I thought, this guy's really creepy. I should probably leave, but my movies weren't finished. I'm not typically afraid of other people, so I stayed, but I had a combat switchblade in my car door for situations like this. I felt pretty safe because of who I am, but this guy seemed to be trying to intimidate me with every lie that came out of his mouth, and there were inconsistencies galore. And then he started walking back up to my car, and I thought, what the heck does this guy want now? We talked for about 30 minutes, although he did most of the talking. Within the first 15 minutes, I learned several things about him without saying much myself. He's looking to buy a house, but already owns 4. He has a restraining order and can't go within 100 feet of where I suggested he look for a home. He's on the dangerous persons list, almost yelling at me to Google it. His father is rich because of an IRA. He claims to be a retired cop, though I didn't believe him, and he showed me his bank account, which said $1,000 per month, but he insisted the police paid him $4,500 per month. He mentioned being in secret operations with the police but couldn't elaborate. He told me he was with the RCMP but couldn't reveal his duties. He claimed to be the main enforcer for the local notorious biker gang, and he spouted off random names as if I should know them. He informed me that people were afraid of him. He asked if I was afraid of him, which gave me a good laugh. People arrived at the coffee shop, and he stated, "Looks like the cowards are coming out of the woodwork." He told me he hadn't been with anybody in 2 years and that he touches himself all the time. He informed me that he watches out for police. He stated that he is untouchable because the biker gangs and the police don't care. I asked if he had family, hinting that he should go be with them instead of bothering me, and he apparently has 4 kids, all hockey champions under the age of 16, trained by the Toronto Maple Leafs coach. He tried to prove this with his phone, but I didn't follow hockey, which disappointed him. He asked me about my occupation, and I told him some fabricated story to hint that I knew that he was full of lies, and he didn't take it well. He asked me if I knew where the best houses were in a suburb of similar-looking $500,000 houses, and I asked if he had a realtor, and he said, "No, I don't need one," and he hinted that everything that he does is off the books, except for the pension plan of $1,000 per month. I became quiet, my palms got sweaty, and I began to think that this guy might be a psychopath. I couldn't even use my phone because my fingers were so wet. I was just vaping, blowing vapor out of the window at him. He wasn't taking the hint, and I considered grabbing my blade and rolling up the window, prepared for a violent reaction like him damaging my car. An elderly man walked past him toward a dumpster, and he said to his face, "Look at this chump." The old man looked wide-eyed and confused, and so was I. The old man looked at me and gave me a confirming look as if he had assessed the situation, was also thinking, what in the world is happening? He claimed to own the entire town and kept mentioning random names. He told me that there's a serial killer living down the street. He told me he wouldn't leave until 7:30 a.m. to avoid being rude to me, which left me even more confused. And we sat in silence for a minute, and then he told me that I should leave because it was going to get loud soon. I wasn't sure why, so I just stopped talking. Another silent minute passed, and then he looked at me, changed his facial expression to anger, and calmly said that if he were me, he'd get out of town right now. I ask, why should I leave? And he says there's a storm coming. I tell him I'm not afraid of thunder, and he looks insulted. He's been speaking in covert wording this entire time, so to get a better feel for this guy, I ask where he's from and if he slept in his truck last night, and he looks offended like I'm the one who was off his rocker, but he doesn't say anything other than no. Silent minutes pass, and he then looks at me, changes his facial expression to anger, and says very calmly that if he were me, he'd get out of town right now. Is he warning me or threatening me? I honestly can't tell. It takes me a few seconds to even process what he's just said. I'm not intimidated in the least, more amused really, and I humor him by saying, "Why's that?" And he starts laughing his head off, walking away now, and asks, "Was it scary?" I laugh and tell him an assured no, shaking my head at the absurdity of him thinking that someone like myself would be scared of someone just a few inches taller than me and roughly the same size. I did martial arts for 15 years, and he's halfway to his truck. Finally, well, for God's sakes, he's now walking back to me. I flick my blade open and casually flip it in the air to invert it blade down, and he fist bumps me and says, "You're a good guy," laughing, and then walks away. Roars away in his truck, windows down, music blaring at 7:35 a.m. That, my friends, is a true narcissist if I've ever encountered one. I just sat there perplexed at this character, wondering how many mental disorder boxes he'd checked off. It wasn't even a question. This guy was trying to intimidate me in any way possible and was trying to prove his worth to me in any way possible as well, reacting to each and all of my facial expressions so quickly and in such a way that made me feel like he was sizing me up the entire time. I like to walk in the mornings after the sun comes up, and the route that I take is mostly through residential areas. However, there is a section that leads down to the waterfront. It's fairly isolated, especially at that time of day, and is lined with tall grasses and trees. I will occasionally pass a runner or someone biking, but that's about it. I don't do this walk as often now because I walk to and from work, but I still enjoy it on the weekends when I have a chance. Last Saturday, I had the chance, so I headed out for a walk. As I was approaching the section that leads down to the water, I saw a man cross the road and enter the trail. After a few moments, as I approached the trail, I expected to see him walking down to the water since you can see for a fair distance, but he was nowhere to be seen. It struck me as odd, and my instincts told me to take the alternate route along the road which meets up further down at the waterfront. I was wary, so I kept looking back, and after a minute or so, I saw him come out of the tall grass and go back across the road into a park area between the houses. I just shrugged it off and figured that maybe he went to have a break. Sunday morning was beautiful, and I decided to go for another walk, and the same thing happened again. This time, I happened to catch a glimpse of him going into the trail. I was seriously creeped out and even crossed the road to go past that section. I continued along the road, and this time I didn't see him come back out, at least not before I went out of sight down to the waterfront. I've been doing that same walk at about the same time for a couple of years, almost every day except recently, and it had crossed my mind that maybe this guy had been watching me. Am I being overly paranoid, though? And now I'm hesitant about taking that route, which sucks because that part of my walk is actually my favorite bit, and I often see deer and lots of birds there. I always have my phone easily accessible, and I have a pouch on my waist with a pocket knife. I also carry 3-pound weights in my hands, and I'm pretty sure that I could defend myself if necessary. What other ways could I be more prepared for a creepy encounter? And should I just avoid that route now, or do you think maybe I'm just overreacting? This incident occurred about 14 years ago when I was 18 years old. I used to be friends with the children of some rather shady individuals during my teenage years. At that time, I resided in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. One of the quickest ways to travel from one part of town to another was by walking along the railroad tracks. To paint a better picture, there were old abandoned buildings lining the tracks. I was wearing a hoodie as I strolled along the tracks when suddenly, from the entrance of one of the buildings, I heard someone exclaim, I think that's him." Startled, I began running, and I could hear someone chasing closely behind me. Eventually, they caught up to me, grabbed my hood, and spun me around. To my surprise, I found myself face to face with one of my friend's dads. He said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, buddy. I mistook you for someone else. You were nearly in some serious trouble." And I responded, "Well, I appreciate you not harming me, man." He then invited me to come over later for dinner, promising to feed me and offer me a few beers as a way to make amends for this misunderstanding. He then added, "And if you happen to come across him, just let him know I'm looking for him." Sometimes it's good to know the wrong people. I'm a female and I was 13 at the time, but I look more like I was 10. My grandma lived 2 states away and discovered that she had stage 4 cancer. My mom packed my sisters and me up and drove us there while my dad stayed home for work. We were there for 3 months. My aunts and uncles lived in the same city as my grandma, and my sisters and I would frequently spend the nights at one of our aunts' houses. One day, I was making lunch for my grandma when my uncle walked into the kitchen. Suddenly, he shouted and rushed out the back door. I caught a glimpse of a man in a red baseball hat running from the kitchen window. He had been watching me, and my uncle claimed that he didn't catch him. We found 2 piles of cigarette butts in the backyard, one by the kitchen window and one by the bathroom window. And strangely, my grandma didn't have blinds or curtains on any of her windows besides her bedroom window, and needless to say, we were horrified. Fast forward a few days, and my mom was certain who the peeping Tom was, my grandma's neighbor, who always wore a red baseball hat and had suddenly become smoking buddies with my uncle. We couldn't prove anything because my uncle backed him up, and we didn't want to distress my grandma, so we let it go. A couple of days later, I was spending the night at one of my aunt's houses while my sisters were at another aunt's. It was just my cousin and me there while my aunt was at the store, and I heard a car door and peeked out the window to see if it was my aunt, but I saw a man standing at the end of the empty driveway. He wore a red baseball hat pulled over his eyes, and my uncle had told him where I was. I freaked out, locked the doors, and told my cousin to call her mom. She was on her way home, but the man was already gone. After that, I never left my mom's side. I stayed every night at my grandma's house, and my dad flew up soon after, and that was the end of the incidents with my grandma's neighbor because there was now a man in the house. And if my dad left for the store or something, he took me with him. It's been 14 years, and many disturbing things have come to light. My uncle was a predator, and one of my sisters was one of his victims. My aunts knew and covered for him, and that sister of mine, she's running the streets, using hard substances to self-medicate, and her son was taken away from her. My parents are absolutely devastated, and the guilt eats away at my mom every single day. My husband and I, both 28 years old, recently relocated to a small town for work. The area is known for its high criminal activity and a significant homeless population, but I'm not usually scared or paranoid while being there. I decided to go thrifting in the hopes of finding a baby safety gate. When I arrived at the store and parked, there was no one in the parking lot. As I entered, a large, well-dressed man followed closely behind me, persistently eyeing me from head to heels. At first, I didn't think much of it and proceeded to the book section that they had. However, after a while, I began to feel as if though someone was hovering around me. I started to feel anxious because every time I looked behind me, the guy was standing way too close, not browsing any books, just pacing around and avoiding eye contact. I'm not a shy person, and I know how to stand up for myself when necessary. I also know a lot better than to let a predator feel like they are intimidating me. So I turned around and gave him a stern look, signaling him to back off, and then I went to the other side of the store to continue shopping. However, the creepy guy followed me. I tried to ignore him and continued looking through clothes, vases, and decorations. Wherever I went, he followed, maintaining an uncomfortably close distance. After 40 minutes, the employee noticed that the guy didn't seem interested in buying anything, and they approached him to ask if he was okay or needed any assistance. He brushed them off with some sort of fabricated story. He continued to persistently follow me and even attempted to corner me in an isolated part of the store. I locked eyes with him, giving him a stern, "don't mess with me" look, until he broke eye contact. Then I turned away and walked as fast as I could, but he remained right behind me. I messaged my husband with my location and sent him a description of the guy explaining what was happening. My husband advised me to leave the store safely as quickly as possible and call the police if necessary. I then asked the employees if they had any safety gates in stock. Before they could respond, the guy answered from behind me and the employee took me to show me what they had available. And of course, the creepy guy followed us. Finally, I went to pay for my items and asked the employee working there to walk me to my car because I didn't feel safe. I was certain that the creepy guy might try to harm me or steal from me. My initial thought was that he had seen me park outside and had followed me, possibly hoping to rob me. I drive a 2023 model truck, so I'm thinking maybe he made a connection there. On the other hand, my husband believed that he just wanted to hit on me, but didn't know how. Having lived in 3 different continents and encountered my fair share of deprived individuals and psychopaths, I'm still unsure what to make of this situation. I'm not sure if I overreacted, as my husband believes I did, but I cannot understand the man's intentions, and I'm hoping to gain closure from this experience. This happened in the early to mid-1980s. I was about 12 years old and had a group of friends that I'd hung out with regularly. I lived in Kenner, Louisiana. And anyway, there was this fad back then to open these teen nightclubs. They didn't serve alcohol, played disco music, and had the same vibe as the cocaine-induced frenzy of adult disco clubs. One of these nightclubs was opening up, and my friends couldn't stop talking about it. I hated crowds, but I was a follower in my group, so I agreed to go with everybody. One of my parents dropped us off, and we paid our $2 to get in. As soon as I entered, I realized that it was super crowded, shoulder to shoulder. I stood near the front door, debating whether or not I was going to stay. After 10 or 15 minutes passed, I got this feeling like someone was watching me. An eerie, creepy vibe. I started looking around, and there were so many people it was like a blur. Then I noticed this middle-aged guy with short brown hair and a striped-collared shirt. He was staring at me as if he knew me or something. Well, I knew that I didn't know him, and that was my cue to leave. It was about a 5-mile walk down a well-lit, semi-busy 2-lane highway, then a right turn and a couple of miles down a 4-lane road into the subdivision. It was only about 8 p.m., and I didn't have to be home until midnight, so I had time to walk it. So I started walking, and about halfway home, our car pulled up on a side road that I was crossing, and it was the same guy from the nightclub. My heart started pounding out of my chest. He had creeped me out amidst around 200 people, and now I was really creeped out on an isolated side of a street by myself. He yelled at me and asked if I wanted to ride. It was pretty far, but I thought, no way, Jose. I said no and kept walking. And then he yelled out at me, "Do you want to make an easy $20? I stopped and asked, "How?" And he said, "Get in the car. I'll tell you." Nope. I just bolted. I took off, and I don't think I've ever run that fast in my entire life. I ran the last 3.5 miles at full speed without stopping and without looking back. I made it home, ran inside the house, and straight to my mom. I didn't even think to look back to see if he was following me, but if he had come here, at least my dad was in the living room. I never told anybody. I really think I was one dumb move away from being on a milk carton, or worse. I go on long walks near my home most nights. I live in a safe suburban neighborhood. It's a huge grid of residential streets in the middle of which is a big open park-type area, larger than 2 football fields that's next to a school. Last night at around midnight, I was walking on the sidewalk next to the park, listening to a podcast, slowly making my way to the school. The school has a big, well-lit parking lot in front with 2 entrances and exits about 25 yards apart. As I neared the school, I noticed a car in the parking lot with its headlights pointed towards the street. This is unusual for this time of night, especially on a weekday. Maybe it's a cop, I thought. I got closer and saw that it was a beat-up red truck. It had started slowly and aimlessly driving around the lot. As I passed the first entrance, the truck seemed to notice me and stop. I got halfway to the second entrance when the truck rushed toward it. I assumed that the driver wanted to pull out before he had to wait for me to cross. No, the truck just sat there, idling as I approached. I got to the entrance and saw that the truck was occupied by 4 men. I motioned to the driver to go ahead, but while looking straight forward, he just motioned with his hands for me to cross. At the same time, I noticed the guy in the back seat staring at me, menacingly. I crossed in front of the truck, expecting the driver to blow the horn or rev the engine, basically to mess with me. He didn't. They just sat there, watching me. I continued down the road, and as I was turning right onto another street, the truck exited the lot, turning in the opposite direction. Just a strange encounter, I thought. A few minutes passed, and I saw the same truck approaching me. Getting to me would have required circling the park and traveling down 3 additional streets, and to do so quickly would have required serious speeding. The truck slowed as it approached, almost stopping as it got to me. The occupants stared daggers at me as they passed, and it felt like they wanted to do something but lost their nerve. Now I'm a little freaked out. Damn my wife for making me watch so much crime ID, I thought to myself. I'm not a paranoid person, so I started rationalizing their behavior. I told myself they're just cruising around, enjoying some weed before going home for the night. That wouldn't have been out of the ordinary for my friends and me to do in high school. And these guys looked too old for this, though, and my gut insisted something was wrong. Out of abundance of caution, I walked a little down the street and crouched behind a big oak tree surrounded by bushes on some random person's property. I know this is inappropriate and possibly dangerous, and I hope that the homeowner wasn't watching me from his Ring doorbell as I lurked on his property, and for a couple of minutes I crouched there before I saw headlights. It was just the neighbor from across the street arriving home. He entered his house and I breathed a sigh of relief. I told myself that I was being ridiculous, and just as I was about to stand up, I heard the rattling of an engine and saw the headlights slowly moving down the street. It's the red truck. I'm sure I imagined it, but I thought I heard its brakes squeal right before my hiding spot. I wondered why this truck was apparently speeding to get to me and slowly when it arrived. It didn't seem like chance, and now I'm convinced this truck is seeking me out. I started running as soon as the brake lights disappeared. I'm a little more than half a mile from home, and I'm not taking any chances. As I turned into the street that intersects with mine, I saw headlights and heard a familiar engine rattle. I can't say with certainty that it was the red truck, but I immediately turned around and ran to the side of another random house. Making things more ominous was the spooky music and witch's cackle coming from the Halloween decorations next door, and I waited another minute, making sure that the red truck didn't pass, and ran the rest of the way home. I walked in, out of breath, and my wife asked me what happened. She scolded me for walking so late at night after I told her the story. The middle-aged woman is strong with her, so she immediately pulled up the Nextdoor app. Apparently, there have been several reports of car break-ins in our area attributed to men in a red truck. It's probably not connected, and I was almost certainly being dramatic. I doubt anything would have happened if I encountered the red truck again, but I'm still glad I didn't. While I was living and studying in the capital of my country, I had a small rented basement in a house built in 1917 next to a nightclub. I was preparing to go to sleep quite early since I had class at 8 a.m. the next day, and right before I fell asleep, I remembered that I had forgotten to lock the door. However, since the city I lived in was generally quite safe and the only way to reach the entrance of my place was past a front gate, all around to the other side of the house and down some stairs, I didn't think much of it and proceeded to fall asleep. Fast forward to the middle of the night, I woke up and felt someone or something slowly pulling my blanket off me. In a confused state, I extended my hand and felt a hairy male arm under my fingers. My first thought was, this is probably my drunk flatmate, but then I remembered that he was at his girlfriend's place on the other side of town. In pitch blackness, I jumped out of my bed, rushed to the light switch, and as I turned it on, I found a stranger who appeared to be around my age, a student, standing in his underwear by my bed, with his underwear clearly wet from urine. My initial reaction was to stay calm, as I had no idea if this guy was violent or what was even going on in the first place, and I calmly asked him, "Man, what the heck are you doing here?" He was clearly very confused as well and took a seat on a recliner that I had in my tiny room. There we were, both in our underwear, him covered in urine, and me on the verge of panicking. What does he do? He extends his hand and introduces himself to me. And at this point I said, "Okay, dude, get out of my house," and started escorting him to the hallway where I found all his clothes and shoes on the floor. As I was escorting him out, he went into the bathroom and locked himself inside. I heard him turn on the shower and I proceeded to knock on the door saying, "Hey man, if you don't leave right now, I'm calling the cops." To which he replied, "I'm not afraid of the police." Well, that's just perfect, isn't it? I thought. A few minutes passed and he stepped out of the bathroom, completely naked, with my flatmate's towel around his waist, looking content and said, "Hey, did you see? They got a shower here." And at that point I was fuming. "Who's got a shower? This is my house. You're a total stranger. You broke into my house." Suddenly, an expression of complete fear appeared on his face. "Oh my God. What have I done? Jesus Christ." He started exclaiming as he very awkwardly tried to get dressed in the hallway. I managed to get him out of the house and even called one of his friends from my phone to come pick him up at the club. It turns out that he was from a completely different town and came to the capital to party, got kicked out of the club for starting a fight, and somehow managed to find my apartment. To this day, I have no idea what he was on or how the hell he managed to find my apartment, as it is quite hidden from the street. My girlfriend and I were graduate students living together in a 6-unit apartment building with an outside stairwell. It was an older Victorian home that had been converted into apartments, and the whole street was lined with similar buildings. It was off campus but conveniently located within walking distance of bars, a coffee shop, and several restaurants. The neighborhood had a laid-back bohemian vibe. The tenants were a mixture of college kids, young professionals, and families. The area was generally safe, but it wasn't too far from a rougher section of town. It was a Thursday night, and being the night owl that I am, it was past 3 a.m., and I had just finished watching a movie. I turned the TV off and went to the stairwell for a quick smoke before bed. We were in the middle of a snowstorm. The ground was covered in 6 inches of fresh powder, and it was freezing, scary cold to be honest. I quickly smoked my cigarette and rushed back inside. My girlfriend always complained about me forgetting to lock the door, and, as was my bad habit, I left the door unlocked. I jumped into bed, and just as I was falling asleep, I thought I heard a noise. I brushed it off at first, but then I heard a creak. Probably just the wind, I concluded. Moments later, I heard the floorboards creaking, and now I was listening intently. My girlfriend felt me shuffling and asked what was wrong, and I told her I thought I heard something, and then we both heard what sounded like someone stumbling into our couch. We shot up and I yelled, "Someone there?" No answer. The floor creaked again. This time in unison we shouted, "Who's there?" Another noise. I quietly stood up and scanned the room for something that could be used as a weapon. Nothing. Growing up, my dad always kept a baseball bat under his bed, and I regretted not adopting that practice. We yelled again, but there was no response. Again, but this time from the darkness, we were greeted by a low-pitched, incomprehensible growl. I wondered if one of my buddies was playing some sort of prank on me, and that seemed out of character for my friends, especially at this hour, on a weekday night, and during a snowstorm. What I really thought was that a crackhead had wandered in, and my girlfriend yelled, "Who's out there?" More footsteps. The intruder was still in the family room, but he was getting closer to our bedroom. We heard the growl again, but this time it was followed by a sort of gurgle and this, "It's Matt." We didn't know any Matts, at least not any that would enter our apartment uninvited in the middle of the night. I looked at my girlfriend. I'd never seen someone so scared, and if worse came to worse, I thought to myself, I know I can outrun this situation, and I hope that it didn't come to that. "Matt who? Matt who?" we shouted repeatedly. After a long pause, he finally said, "Matt, I'm friends with Mike and Kelly." Relief washed over both of us. Mike and Kelly were our neighbors. We turned on the lights and walked into the family room, and there he stood, a 6'2", slovenly-looking college kid. Matt was blacked out drunk. Our neighbors had hosted a pregame party at their apartment, followed by a trip to the nearby bars. They had abandoned Matt, and despite the storm, he had found his way back to their apartment. Their door was locked, and his phone calls had gone unanswered. His evolutionary drive to survive had kicked in, and he had sought warmth in the first unlocked apartment he could find. I told him that he scared the living daylights out of us and that he had to go. He stepped outside, and I quickly locked the door behind him. The next day, I learned that Matt was fine. He'd been discovered by another neighbor, huddled next to her car under the lean-to garage. I'm just kidding. I have no idea what happened to Matt. I do, however, remember being a little concerned for him after my nerves had finally settled. Hey friends, thanks so much for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursday nights. I'd love to see you there. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, or send it over email, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, happy birthday.